There's a reason creepypasta stories have become the campfire tales of the internet age. They're the digital ghost stories we share in the dark, the ones that make us check our locks, turn on an extra light, and wonder if maybe, just maybe, there's some truth behind the fiction. But what if the stories weren't just stories? What if the things you read online started to bleed into your real life? Tonight, I'm sharing 5 creepypasta stories that actually happened, and what happened to me after I read them will make you question every notification, every glitch, and every shadow in your room. Because after I finished reading, my phone went crazy. It started as a challenge. I wanted to see if I could find 5 creepypasta stories with real-life origins. Stories that weren't just made up for clicks, but had roots in actual events, police reports, or eyewitness accounts. I thought it would be fun, maybe a little spooky, but nothing I couldn't handle. Furthermore, I was wrong. The first story I found was about the smiling man. You've probably heard the legend: a lone walker, a city street at night, and a man with an impossibly wide grin who follows you, never speaking, never blinking, just smiling. The original creepypasta is chilling, but what's even scarier is that it's based on dozens of real encounters. People from all over the world have reported seeing a figure just like him, always at night, always alone, always smiling. One woman in Chicago described being followed for 3 blocks by a man who never broke eye contact, his grin stretching wider and wider until she ducked into a convenience store and called a friend to pick her up. The police never found him, but the story stuck with her. As I read her account, my phone buzzed. A text from an unknown number, just a smiley face. I laughed it off, but a chill ran down my spine. The second story was about the stairs in the woods. It sounds like a classic internet myth. Park rangers and hikers finding perfectly intact staircases deep in the forest, leading nowhere, with no sign of a house or building nearby. The creepypasta versions are wild. Some say climbing the stairs makes you disappear, while others claim you'll see things you can't explain. But the truth is, there are real reports of these staircases, especially in remote parts of the United States and Europe. One ranger in Maine described finding a spiral staircase made of stone, covered in moss, miles from any trail. He took a photo, but when he tried to send it to a friend, his phone crashed and the image was gone. As I finished reading, my phone screen flickered, the brightness dimming for a moment before snapping back to normal. I told myself it was just a glitch. The third story was about the black-eyed children. The legend goes like this: you're home alone, late at night, when there's a knock at the door. 2 children stand outside, asking to come in. Their clothes are old-fashioned, their skin is pale, and their eyes are completely black. The stories say you should never let them in, no matter what. I found a real account from a man in Texas who claimed 2 kids knocked on his door during a thunderstorm, asking to use the phone. He felt a wave of dread and slammed the door shut. Later, he found muddy footprints on his porch and a voicemail from an unknown number. Just static and faint, childlike laughter. As I read his story, my phone vibrated again. This time, it was a missed call from a number with all zeros. I didn't call back. The fourth story was about the expressionless. In the original creepypasta, a woman with a mannequin-like face is brought into a hospital, her mouth frozen in a permanent smile, her eyes wide and unblinking. The nurses and doctors are so disturbed by her appearance that they can barely function. The story is fiction, but it's inspired by real cases of people suffering from rare neurological conditions that leave them unable to move their facial muscles. I found a news article about a woman in Russia who was hospitalized after her face became paralyzed in a rictus grin. The doctors couldn't explain it, and the woman refused to speak. As I read, my phone's camera app opened by itself, the front-facing camera staring back at me. I closed it quickly, but the unease lingered. The fifth and final story was about the shadow people. These are the dark, human-shaped figures that people claim to see out of the corner of their eye, always just out of reach, always watching. The creepypasta versions are terrifying, but the phenomenon is real enough that psychologists have studied it, linking it to sleep paralysis and extreme stress. I read an account from a man in London who saw a shadow figure standing at the foot of his bed every night for a week. He tried to film it, but every time he pressed record, his phone would freeze. On the last night, he woke up to find his phone on the floor, the battery drained, and a single, blurry photo in his gallery. A dark shape, barely visible, but unmistakably human. As I finished reading, my phone buzzed one last time. The screen glitched, the battery dropped from 80% to 10% in seconds, and every app crashed at once. I sat there in the dark, my heart pounding, my phone useless in my hand. I tried to laugh it off, to tell myself it was just a coincidence, just a series of glitches. But the stories felt too close, too real, and the line between fiction and reality had blurred in a way I couldn't explain. I turned off my phone, set it face down, and tried to sleep. But every time I closed my eyes, I saw the smiling man, the black-eyed children, and in the shadow people, waiting, watching, just out of reach. The next morning, I woke up to the sound of my phone buzzing on the nightstand. For a moment, I hesitated to even touch it. The battery, which had drained so suddenly the night before, was now inexplicably back to full. My notifications were a mess. Missed calls from numbers I didn't recognize, texts that were just strings of random symbols, and a handful of blurry photos in my gallery that I didn't remember taking. I tried to shake off the unease, telling myself it was just a bad dream, a trick of the mind after reading too many scary stories. But the feeling lingered, heavy and cold, as if the stories had left a mark on my reality that I decided to retrace my steps, to see if I could find a rational explanation for everything that had happened. I started with the smiling man. I searched online for more accounts, hoping to find a debunking, a logical explanation. Instead, I found dozens of new stories, people from all over the world describing the same figure, the same grin, the same sense of dread. Some had photos, grainy and indistinct, but all showing a tall, thin man with a smile that seemed to stretch too wide. One user claimed the smiling man had followed him home, standing outside his window for hours before vanishing at dawn. Another said she saw him reflected in a store window, even though the street behind her was empty. The more I read, the more my phone seemed to act up, freezing, glitching, refusing to load certain pages. It was as if the story itself was infecting my device, spreading like a virus. Next, I looked into the stairs in the woods. I found forums filled with photos, some clearly fake, others disturbingly real. One image showed a staircase made of marble, pristine and untouched, standing alone in a forest of dead trees. Another showed a spiral staircase, half buried in moss, with no sign of a house or foundation nearby. The stories that accompanied the photos were even stranger. One hiker claimed he climbed a set of stairs and lost all sense of time, emerging hours later with no memory of what had happened.
Another said he found a staircase with fresh footprints leading up, but none coming down. As I scrolled through the images, my phone's screen flickered and the brightness dimmed again. I tried to take a screenshot, but the phone crashed, rebooting itself with a shudder. The black-eyed children were next. I found message boards filled with warnings. Never let them in. Never speak to them. Never make eye contact. Some users claimed the children could manipulate electronics, causing phones to ring, lights to flicker, and batteries to drain. I remembered the missed call from the night before, the number with all zeros. I checked my call log, but the entry was gone, erased as if it had never existed. Furthermore, I tried calling the number back, but my phone refused to connect, the screen flashing an error message I'd never seen before. It felt like the stories were reaching out, trying to make contact, trying to cross the line between fiction and reality. The expressionless haunted me the most. I couldn't stop thinking about the woman with the frozen smile, the way her presence seemed to warp the world around her. I searched for medical explanations, for stories of people with similar conditions. Furthermore, I found articles about rare neurological disorders, about people whose faces were locked in permanent expressions. But I also found stories from nurses and doctors who claimed to have seen patients who didn't seem entirely human. People who moved strangely, who never blinked, who seemed to radiate a sense of wrongness. As I read, my phone's camera app opened again, this time snapping a photo without my permission. The image was blurry, but in the background, I could just make out a pale, smiling face reflected in the window behind me. Finally, I returned to the shadow people. I found entire communities dedicated to sharing experiences and stories of figures that appeared in the corner of the room, that watched from the foot of the bed, and that vanished when the lights came on. Some users claimed the shadow people could travel through technology, appearing in photos, videos, and even video calls. I checked my own gallery, heart pounding, and found a new photo I didn't remember taking. It was a shot of my bedroom, taken in the middle of the night. In the corner, just behind the door, was a dark, human-shaped shadow. I stared at the image, trying to convince myself it was just a trick of the light, a glitch, or a reflection. But the longer I looked, the more certain I became that I hadn't been alone. By now, my phone was barely functioning. Apps crashed as soon as I opened them. The battery drained and recharged at random, and the screen flickered with static. I tried to reset it, to wipe everything and start fresh, but the device refused to cooperate. It was as if the stories had taken root, burrowing into the circuits, refusing to let go. I thought about throwing the phone away, about smashing it and buying a new one. But I was afraid that whatever had attached itself to my device might not be so easy to get rid of. That night, I turned off my phone and left it in another room. I tried to sleep, but every sound made me jump. Every shadow seemed to move. I kept thinking about the stories, about the people who had experienced the same things, and about the line between fiction and reality. Not only that, but I wondered if the stories had always been real, if the internet was just a new way for the old fears to find us. I wondered if, by reading them, I had invited something in. In the days that followed, the glitches faded. My phone returned to normal, the strange photos disappeared, and the missed calls stopped. But the fear lingered, a quiet presence at the edge of my thoughts. I realized that the scariest part of the stories wasn't the monsters or the ghosts. It was the way they made the world feel different, the way they made me question what was real and what was just a story. I still read creepypastas, still chase the thrill of a good scare. But now, I do it with the lights on, with my phone face down, and with the knowledge that sometimes, the things we fear most are the ones we invite into our lives. Thank you for joining me on this journey through 5 creepypasta stories that actually happened and the strange, unsettling things that happened to me after I read them. If you have a story of your own, a moment when a scary story became a little too real, share it in the comments. You never know who might need to hear it, who might find comfort in knowing they're not alone. Stay safe, trust your instincts, and remember, sometimes the scariest stories are the ones that could happen to any of us.